Hey everybody, Forrest here with Rocky Mountain School of Photography. Today we are going to do a much requested video on why to use neutral density filters with a GoPro or other action camera. Before we dive in, I have a couple quick disclaimers / notes about this video. The first one is ND filters will only help you in specific situations. These are not something you will always have on the front of your GoPro. In fact, an ND filter used poorly and at the wrong time can actually make your video footage worse. NDs are for brightly lit situations when you are trying to get the best possible quality out of your camera. If you're trying to get almost the best possible quality out of your camera, definitely check out my GoPro setup guide up there in the corner. I'm gonna assume that everyone watching this video either has a very basic understanding of your GoPro or has watched that video. The second disclaimer is this: putting an ND filter on the front of your GoPro will negatively affect the quality and the effectiveness of the GoPro Hyper Smooth stabilization. One of the best features of the new GoPro Hero 9 is how awesome the stabilization is. When you put a dark filter on the front of your camera, you're inhibiting the ability for that stabilization to be as good as it can be. So it's almost a little bit of a trade-off. An ND filter will give you better, smoother looking video, but if you're on a situation where your camera is being bumped around a lot, I would highly recommend skipping the ND filter in favor of better Hyper Smooth. Truth be told though, it's gonna be situation by situation. So I recommend if this is something that you wanna play with and you do wanna get the best possible, smoothest, butteriest, crispiest video out of your GoPro, a little bit of trial and error is going to be necessary. So with those disclaimers out of the way, it's time to talk a little bit about what an ND filter is. Now, they're called ND filters, they're called neutral density filters, that's what ND stands for. But the two words, neutral and density, both mean something important. Let's start with density. At its core, a neutral density filter is just a filter that makes your video footage darker. Let me apply one right now. Boom, right there. I've darkened this video footage. I've made this video a little bit darker. Now I've done it in post-production, but the same would be true as if I actually reached up and screwed an ND filter on the front of my camera. So density means darker. It's a filter that darkens your footage. The second thing that an ND filter, or not second thing that it does, but the other word, the word neutral, is that the filter gives no extra color cast to the video footage, meaning you don't put the filter on and everything turns green or blue or something like that. They're neutral, so they're neutral darkening filters. That's the way to think about it. And ND filters come in a variety of different thicknesses or densities, however you want to refer to it. Basically, you're gonna see like this little kit right here. This is the kit from Polar Pro. This comes with an ND8, an ND16, and an ND32. All you gotta realize is the higher the ND number, the darker the filter is. Now, I wish I could just magically tell you, always use an ND32 in this situation, always use an ND8 in this situation, but it's not quite that simple. So let's now take a look at how we utilize these to ensure we get the best possible video footage out of our GoPro. Now, the proper use of an ND filter all relies around getting the proper shutter speed out of our camera. So what we need to do first, before we even look at the filters, is get the camera settings set up correctly so that we can then decide how dense or which of these filters we should use in a given situation. Now, I think it's worth coming in here real quick and making a quick reminder of our first disclaimer in this video. If you're gonna be shooting in a dimly lit situation, leave the ND filters at home. They're not gonna help you, right? Adding darkness to a dark scene is not gonna help you. But if you know you're going skiing or snowboarding for a day and it's gonna be bright sun, this can be a really great little kit to throw in your bag and bring with you. Side note, I've linked this kit down in the description so you guys can pick it up down there. So to get the camera set up with the best possible quality, what we're gonna do is pop into the settings. And again, I'm gonna assume that you guys have watched my GoPro setup video, but I'm gonna go into the options for a certain mode here. I'm gonna go to resolution and frames per second, and I'm gonna assume that we're gonna shoot 5K at 24 frames per second. 24 frames per second gives you the most kind of, you could say cinematic, but really the most smooth looking video, assuming you don't wanna slow things down and use slow-mo. Again, check out my GoPro setup guide. and 5K is the highest resolution, so we wanna get, again, it's all about the best quality, so we're gonna shoot 5K at 24 frames per second. Now, from there, we're gonna scroll down. I'm gonna set my lens to linear. I don't want the super wide field of view for what I'm envisioning with my shots here. Again, you can change that. Hyper smooth, we're gonna turn on. We can skip everything else. The real important stuff is down in the Pro Tune settings. Now in Pro Tune, again, going for best quality, high bit rate, important, that's gonna give us the best quality. Shutter speed, this one is the key, and really shutter speed is the reason why we buy ND filters. So what I'm gonna do, auto means the camera's gonna pick whatever shutter speed it wants to. And the problem with that is if the camera picks a super fast shutter speed, it's gonna make your video look a little bit jittery and not super smooth. You're not gonna see a lot of motion blur frame to frame to frame. And motion blur is something that we're used to seeing as human beings, and it makes our video seem more immersive, it makes it seem more lifelike, it makes our viewer feel like they were there with us when they look at our video. So what we're gonna do, this is real simple, we're gonna set our shutter speed to double whatever our frame rate is. So in this case, we're shooting 24 frames per second. So I'm gonna put my shutter speed at 1/48th of a second. Now, if I was shooting 30 frames per second, I would go to a 60th of a second. If I was shooting 120, I'd go to 240th of a second. You can just double your frame rate and that's gonna give you the shutter speed you should use. So we're gonna set it to 1/48. Additionally, like I said in my basic video, I'm gonna set my white balance to whatever the white balance in the scene is. And then lastly, I'm gonna set my ISO min and ISO max to 100. This is key. ISO is your sensor's sensitivity to light, and actually I am saying it wrong, everybody. Newsflash, it's actually called ISO. I've been saying it wrong forever. Apologies, those of you who corrected me in the comments, I appreciate you. I'm gonna set my ISO min and my ISO max to 100. This is going to make my camera as little sensitive to light as possible, but it's going to maximize the quality out of the camera. From there, the other important things, I'm gonna put my color on GoPro, I'm gonna put my sharpness on low, and everything else can stay at the defaults. The key here, you all, is ISO min and max at 100 and shutter speed at double your frame rate. Okay, now that we have our shutter speed and our ISO set correctly, we need to take a minute and understand what's happening here. We are essentially taking full manual exposure control of our GoPro over, and we're not letting the camera make any decisions when it comes to the brightness of the recorded video. Those of you who've maybe watched my basic video, remember, when it comes to exposure, we have 3 settings: aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. And aperture is not controllable on the GoPro. We are locking our shutter speed to double what our frame rate is, and our ISO is maximum of 100 or minimum of 100, which I think means 100. This means that what we see on our camera is what the camera's going to capture, and if we take our camera out on a bright day, we're gonna record bright footage. The camera's not gonna help us make the footage look correctly exposed. If you shoot in a darkly lit environment, if you shoot in a dimly lit environment, you're gonna get dim video footage. If you shoot in a brightly lit environment, you're gonna get video footage that's too bright. I think you see where I'm going with this. So what we're gonna do once we get this set, we're gonna go outside or in your shooting environment, and you're gonna point your camera around and look at what the back of the camera looks like. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna try these different filters and see which one gives you the best looking video on the back of the camera. Now, there are fancy apps you can use to calculate what level of ND you should use in different situations. There's all that kind of stuff. I'm a firm believer of actually see it with my own eyes. So what I would do is I would go outside with these settings set correctly. I'd point my camera out at my scene. I'd try the ND8. If the footage still looks too bright, I'd go up to the ND16. If it still looks too bright, I would go up to the ND32. Now you all don't get too confused. All we're doing here is we're telling the camera, hey camera, use the best settings. The problem is if the camera uses the best settings, it's not ever going to decide to use worse settings to make your image look properly exposed. So we are taking the exposure responsibility upon ourselves, and we're using these filters to correct for it. Once you pop the filter on, which is done super easily, all you have to do is pop this front cap off the GoPro. You simply pull out and twist, and then we can open our little GoPro or our little Polar Pro kit here. We can pop a new ND on and twist that locks on the new ND filter. Once you put that filter on, you can shoot for the rest of the day and not have to worry about any of these settings. One thing to keep in mind though is as you're shooting, keep an eye on the video footage. If it starts to get a little bit too dark, maybe step down to a less intense ND filter. If it starts to get a little bit too bright, maybe step up to a more dense ND filter. One little add-on I need to talk about here is what if you set these settings, right? The ISO min, ISO max of 100 and the shutter speed of double your frame rate, and you go out to shoot and your footage is too dark and you don't have an ND filter on. Well, like I said in my setup guide, that's a great time to increase the ISO max. That's gonna allow your camera to use a higher ISO, which is gonna give your camera more sensitivity to light, and that's a great indicator that you don't need an ND filter in that situation. All right, so you shoot the rest of the day, you shoot happily, you're able to use that double your frame rate rule for your shutter speed, and hopefully you capture some great footage. I know for me, I found that the difference in having motion blur versus not having motion blur in my footage was pretty stark. I really like the look of having that double your frame rate for your shutter speed setting. I think it makes footage look smoother, makes it look better. It really gives it that crisp, beautiful look that I'm after in my video footage. Now, I will also say this, and this is gonna be a future video. I'm gonna make a video on why you would use ND filters for still photography as well, because there's some really cool things we can do with still images with NDs if we have that ability, but this was all focused on video. Hopefully you guys like this video. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment section down below. If you like this video, I would really appreciate you hitting that like button. It really helps our channel grow out there in the world. And lastly, if you really like this video and you wanna learn more from Rocky Mountain School of Photography, hit that subscribe button up in the corner or down below, turn on the bell to turn on notifications, and I think that's about it. Oh, lastly, check out our community forum. If you guys are into photography and you wanna ask questions of super knowledgeable people, we have a forum all around photography and business and marketing and all the things that are related to running a business in photography. So check that out. I put a link down in the description. Link to the Polar Pro filters are down there as well. I'll catch you in the next one. Hopefully you learned something. Thanks for watching.